Right, greetings everyone, and welcome to the first installment under the philosophy section of the Physiology and Philosophy podcast. Today's episode is going to be giving you some more insights into some of the content you can expect to see in the future under the philosophy domain of the podcast. And today is all about mindfulness 101. And my goal here is to expose you to some of the ideas and why I personally think it's important to develop your own mindfulness toolbox. And then at the end, I'll go over some specific examples of the different practices that have helped me and therefore are the practices that I'm going to try to expose you all to. And just as a disclaimer, again, I don't think I'm an expert. I know I'm not an expert. I'm not formally trained. So if anything that I say goes against something that you've heard in a different practice, then I empower you to ultimately just take whatever works for you. And everything I'm saying is my own personal opinion today and not fact. So please just have some patience with me there. For starters, I think it's almost easier to explain the opposite of mindfulness first and what a mindless life could potentially look like. And that's one, to me personally, in which you go through life just sort of bouncing through thought to thought, and you get swept away by these different urges and emotions, and you never are intentional or intentionally checking in and really aware of the quality of your thoughts. And I think this is something that, again, and it's no fault to you if you, it's not an attacking statement if you feel like you are in one of those camps. Because I think unless you're taught and unless you're open to it, I think that's our baseline, that's sort of the underlying mechanics of our brain, is to kind of just go from one thought to the next and bounce and use our emotions to guide our actions. So again, that's not a slight to anyone by any means, but I think if you develop a mindfulness practice of sorts, and the reference I'm going to use today is, I don't think it's one specific thing, but I think there's sort of a mindfulness toolbox that you can develop, and you can start to have different tools for different situations here. And to me, what living a mindful life is one where you're intentionally aware of what the quality of your thoughts are. And by checking in and seeing what the baseline state of your mind is, and you can then start to remove yourself from certain situations that may be driven by emotion. And if you're like me, and if you're at baseline a very anxious person, then what I've personally found is two things. One, your thoughts tend to be very fast, where they go from one thing to the next, and they tend to have a negative spin on them, and they're typically fast, negative, and future oriented. And outside of these specific thoughts, you can have a general feeling like you don't have control, and that there's sort of an underlying tone to each of these thoughts that can be either negative or sad. And that's not a good place to operate from. And unfortunately, for me, and I know for a lot of other people, that's sort of my baseline. And what being aware of that and what developing a mindfulness toolbox can do, for one, I think it allows you to interject at a given thought. And I think once you can interject, there's some times where you'll be able to see a thought coming, you'll feel the negative emotion associated with it, and then you can think about it rationally, and then you can let it go. And we'll call that best case scenario. And that's completely letting go of a negative thought and being okay with it. And sometimes that's going to happen, sometimes it's not. But I think another skill that you can develop is preventing what I call the accumulation of these sticky negative feelings. And you can just have these brief pauses and a gap in a negative thought. And that to me comes from several tools in this mindfulness toolbox, that instead of completely alleviating something and moving on from it, you just have a gap. And when you have a gap here, whether this gap in negative thoughts is monthly or weekly or daily or hourly, to me, what it does is it just gives you a moment of peace, where if you can find a moment in peace and you were in a funk for a month, just to know that that state exists and you don't have to perpetually be lost in these negative thoughts has a lot of power. And then when you start to be able to see these moments of peace and create these gaps, what it does for me is it prevents these things from sticking. So instead of carrying fatigue or negativity from week to week, you can kind of, reset the inbox and you're starting from zero. And sometimes negative thoughts will appear, but if you just think about it, if you're going into next week and your negative thoughts are at 2 or 3 compared to not having this moment of peace, and you're going into next week already anxious, then to me, that's where funks develop. And that's where you can find yourself deep, deep, deep down in a rut that seems like you can't get out of. So developing these mindfulness practices, again, I think gives you the ability to find these brief moments, and these brief moments at least reset things a little bit. And then the more trained you get, the more frequently you can interject these moments of peace, and then the less intense these negative emotions can be, and then suddenly you increase the level of the playing field mentally that you operate on. That's sort of the end goal, at least for me. And now, if those were some of the reasons to develop this mindfulness toolbox for a baseline anxious person, I think that's where you're going to see the quickest effect and the most benefit. But I think there's even a rationale for developing some of these practices if you're not anxious and if you consider yourself to be a high performer and very stable. And again, if you're in this camp, I'm happy for you. But if you want to look at through a professional lens, I think even if you're not anxious, you're likely going to come into a situation with your own biases and your own ego. And I think developing a mindfulness practice or these tools, it can help you approach a situation and see things more clearly as they are, without the presence of your ego and without the presence of these emotions. And I think having a better understanding of what the situation actually is going to give you a more complete 360 view of what's going on. And it's then going to allow you to think more critically on what a potential solution is. And on top of that, you're going to develop more empathy for those people who you're interacting with. So not only are you going to see the situation clear, are you going to be able to think critically, but you're going to be able to then think about what's the most effective way for me to deliver these thoughts, taking into the account of everyone else in this room. And if you can start to see things clearly and take effective action and do it with the good intentions for everyone you're interacting with, I think it's a win for everyone, because the people on your team, they're going to want to work with you more, and it's going to help you be more effective, and you may not succumb to some of these biases that may have been blocking you in the past. And okay, you're not anxious, you have your business under control. I still think developing these practices can be good in the lens of, I think it can lower the threshold of these more joyful experiences of life. So I think you can start to appreciate the mundane things like they are the things that you used to think you had to strive for to feel happy. You can start to really appreciate very simple things like your senses and just being able to see, touch, and taste and feel. And when you lower the threshold for these joyful emotions, to me, I think I'm not there yet. I'm not even close. But that, to me, is how I think you've really started to elevate the quality of your life. Where instead of you needing a lot of this external gratification to feel good, if you can feel happy and fulfilled on the simple things, that's personally what I'm striving for, because then you have more control over the quality of your life. So to me, I think that's sort of an end goal, is to be able to appreciate the simple things and really experience these moments of awe and appreciate your life. So I think those are some of the outcomes of what you can, I don't want to say expect or hope, because I think part of this is more of just accepting, but I think those are some of the benefits you can derive from creating your own mindfulness toolbox. And now I've sort of outlined some of the specific practices that I've implemented that go into this toolbox, because I could sit here all day and talk theoretically, and it's what I enjoy, and I hope to bring on experts to talk theoretically and also specifically as well. But I think at some point you have to say, okay, what are tangible practices I can add to my life to improve the quality of my mental health? So to me, again, not an expert here, but I've layered them on where I think you can start and then build on top of each other. And that's sort of what I'll dive into in this section, and just sort of generally touch on them. And then I'll have, several episodes going over each layer. So for me, the first piece of the mindfulness puzzle is really conquering the physical side. And I know this is under the philosophy area of the podcast, and it's not in the physiology side, but to me, it just puts you in a position to better see the benefits of these mindfulness practices. If you start to really optimize your sleep, improve your nutrition habits, and at least just have some daily movement, I think it just changes some things neurally that allow you to better reap the benefits of some of these things. And sometimes I'll get lost and I'll try all these practices, and it's tough for me to really just sit or to walk or to journal or to really sink into any of these mindfulness practices. But altering something physically is always where I come back to. So to me, it's where you start, and it's where you can come back to anytime you get lost. Because you may be anxious, you might be sad, but what I tell myself is, okay, if I can't fix this right now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put myself in a position to fix this. I'm going to make sure that I get good sleep tonight. I'm going to make sure that I put good food in my body tonight. And I'm going to make sure that I move tomorrow. And by doing that, I think it puts your body in it. Your body tells your mind that, okay, now it's time to address this. So that's the physical side. To me, that's step one. Step two, there's a series of practices that fall under the bucket of what I call checking in. And this is where you just are starting to tune in to what your mind is saying. Because sometimes instead of listening, we just act. And I think it's very important for you to really, get comfortable with sitting by yourself and listening to your thoughts. And I think there's a couple different ways you can apply this, but I think you can check in by simply going for a walk. And we can dive into some of the mechanisms in a future episode on why walking is such a good mindfulness practice. But when you're walking, when I mean check in, you can give yourself these prompts of, how am I feeling? Is there anything that's worrying me? Why might that be worrying me? Is there anything I can do about it? If there's something I can do about it, maybe let's set up a plan. If I don't know, is there anyone I can reach out to? And then you can kind of go down this area of the trichotomy of control. Is there anything that I can do that's fully in my control, or partially in my control, or not in my control at all? And when you address things like that, something that might be a really big, giant or a demon or whatever mythical creature you want to think of, it starts to lose its power a little bit. But mainly it's just about the exercise of checking in and seeing, and then just starting to open up this dialogue of, hey, it's not just thought and then there's no interjection possible, but it's you listen to the thought and you can start to toy with it a little bit. And I think if walking is one avenue that falls into this checking in bucket, another one is journaling. And again, I think that's something that has been discussed in depth, but I think it's been discussed so much because it works. And I think you can find your own journaling practice that works for you, but same thing. One way to do this is to follow these prompts and just sit there with a pen and paper and say, what's going on? And how am I feeling? And is there anything I can do about it? And to me, again, put yourself in a good position physically, open the dialogue, start to check in, see where things are at. And I think it's really important to go in this order, because now that you're sort of starting to be aware of the quality of your thoughts, it helps. You're not going to be so resistant to a thought, and you're not going to get swept away as easily. But you have to sort of open up this acceptance that not all the thoughts are going to be positive, and start to get comfortable checking in and swimming and really, grappling with some of these negative emotions potentially. And then after that, I think is where the bucket of meditation comes into play. And now there's probably dozens of different meditation practices, but I think what I will try to cover are sort of the three main ones that are present in the literature, and then sort of an offshoot of the meditation practice that I've sort of, I'm not going to say developed, but adapted to meet my own needs. And I think of the different meditation practices, one of the initial ones that most people focus on is this focused attention meditation. And that's the one where you'll traditionally start in a seated position, and you'll do something like a body scan where you just check in with your body, and then you start to really just focus on the breath. And I think this does two things. One, it's a step advanced from this checking in where you're going to see the quality of your thoughts, and you're going to be okay with that. And two, it starts to you start to realize how distracted you're going to get, because a thought's going to pop in, and then you're going to go chase that thought. But then the exercise here, what everyone says, is you're developing the muscle to realize you were distracted and to come back. And the art of this practice is recognizing you're lost and coming back. So you don't want to come into this practice with this expectation that you're never going to get lost, but you want to just have patience with yourself. And really, just to me, this is a good introduction into mindfulness, because it also starts to blend into another practice, which is this open-minded meditation. Because in this focused attention meditation, you start to see that your thoughts just generate on their own. And the whole notion of free will is something that I'm probably not going to touch on, and we can save for a later day if you want. But when you sit, you start to see that your thoughts, they just pop up. And then you start to, if you don't have the skill to let things go right away, you at least start to see hey, I don't have to identify and hold on to every thought that pops up. And then when you start to lean into this open-minded meditation, where that's one of the ways you can practice it, is you simply just sit there and you note thoughts as they pop up. And you sit, you recognize a thought, you note it, and then you can watch it go away. And that to me was the first sort of light bulb moment in my personal training, was when you develop the inhibitory mental muscle to not attach yourself to all these thoughts, and you can let them go. And I think that's a very powerful skill to develop. And it's also a practice for me that is creative in nature, because you just sit and it's not like this, you don't have to be rigorous and focused on something. You're just checking in and you're seeing where your thoughts are. Then you start to almost release the valve of what it takes for thoughts to pop up. And then when you want to do things more creative in nature, you've unlocked that muscle in your brain, and now you can maybe access some more creative thoughts a little more easily. And not to say that each thought's going to be good, but I think a part of the creative process, or any working process in general, is getting through the bad thoughts till you find the good ones. So I think there's a lot of benefits to this open-minded meditation as well. And another one of the staples is this loving kindness meditation, sometimes referred to as metta. And I think historically or traditionally in this practice, you start by just thinking about people that you have nothing but feelings of love for. And that could be family members, that could be loved ones you're in a relationship with, or just anyone that you wish really good feelings for. And there's a variety of ways you can practice it, but just the simple act of thinking and cultivating this feeling of love for people in your life is very rewarding. And if all the way in the beginning I mentioned finding a practice that helps give you a pause or a break, to me this is one of them, where I just think of my family members and my loved ones and extend it to my friends and everyone who means so much to me in my life. It's tough to be anxious when you're just thinking about other people and how much you care about them and how grateful you are to have them. And then there's this sort of subtle flip in the end where you can say, hey, I'm sure these people would rather me love myself as well. And then you can kind of end with this and say that in this practice, I love all these people. You cultivate this feeling of love, and then it helps you love yourself a little more as well. So I think those are the 3 different domains of the more traditional ones that you can practice. And then the adapted mindfulness practice that has helped me a lot, and is sort of a accumulation of each of these 3, is the only one that I personally do lying down. And traditionally I'll do this on a Saturday or a Sunday, but I'll lie down, and for the first 30 minutes, I'm kind of doing this checking in, where I'm just seeing the quality of my thoughts. I'm seeing what was worrying me throughout the week, and I try to make peace with everything. And the goal here is what I call mental inbox 0, and where I want to get to a point where I'm like, hey, what am I worried about, and what sort of post-it notes can I put on these things so I know and they know that I have a plan for it, and that there's no benefit in worrying. And you essentially just try to accept everything, make peace with everything, and you check in and you make a plan. And to me, that's the first 30 minutes. Sometimes it takes longer, sometimes you get stuck there. But where this practice has really given me the best mental states is when you've checked in, and then you hit this inbox 0, and then you feel this state of presence just for about 30 minutes. And to me, you can listen to music here, whatever music helps put you in the state. To me, it's sort of this melodic house, like Lane 8, and then you just feel your body. And that to me is, I'm not thinking about anything, and I'm just feeling my body. And this is where you feel like you're just existing, and it's okay to just exist, and you can radiate in this feeling of love that you have for yourself and for the fact that you're just alive. And I don't think the goal of mindfulness should ever be to seek euphoria, but I think it's euphoria through relaxation. Personally, for me, it's in those instances is where I finally just, and I tell my fiance this all the time, and she can attest to this because she sees me when I come out. But again, if you're like me and you're very anxious as your nature, I carry things day to day sometimes, especially when my toolbox isn't being used. And when you carry things, you can operate in this very hyped up state. And when I do this, I can really feel my heart rate just start to go down, and it feels like you shift into this restorative mode. So I think this practice is one that's good for the mind and the body. And those are some of the 4 specific meditation practices that I'll try to give more details on as we move forward. And I think that covers the gist of why I think developing your own personal mindfulness toolbox is important, and some of the different categories and skills that I'll try to give more concrete examples on as we move forward. And again, I can't stress this enough, that my goal is to expose you guys to everything, and for you to be able to pick and choose what works for you to put your own spin on it. And then along this journey, I'll try to bring on actual experts in this area, so it's not just me, and hopefully they can give you a more professional opinion. And then maybe we can learn together how to improve or throw away some of these practices, and collectively open the conversation on mindfulness, all things mental health, and just go through this together. And that's the goal here, and I hope that you guys are excited as I am, and I look forward to chatting again soon.